Welcome to GC Sidebar, a short and sharp conversation series with leading general counsels about the decisions, the reflections, and the people behind the title. I'm Trista Engel, CEO of Paragon Legal, and today I'm joined by Nishat Ruiter, general counsel at TED Conferences, the nonprofit that brings us TED Talks, TED Conferences, and now TED Law. Nishat has built and led the TED legal team for nearly a decade, and alongside her core legal responsibilities, she conceived, developed, and recently launched TED Law, a new learning initiative reimagining how legal leaders build judgment, ethical reasoning, and AI readiness. Nishat, I'm so excited to chat with you, and congrats on the launch of TED Law. Before we get into the questions, can you give us a quick overview of what TED Law is?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And so happy to be here with you. Excited to have a quick chat. So TED Law really emanates from this idea that lawyers have a great amount of potential, and we are at this interesting inflection point. And the inflection point is where we see AI threatening or challenging our practice, where we have to adapt to use it and really understand it. We see the pressures around the rule of law and ethics and our role as lawyers in this industry in a way that's probably never happened before, at least in my memory, in the last 30 years that I've been practicing. And the question really is, how do we address this in a way that's meaningful? And what's interesting about lawyers is the way we're trained is actually to learn about precedent and to learn about decisions that have already been made. We're not really trained to think independently and creatively create a judgment or to analyze what the best argument could be. We're typically asked to reflect on prior decisions and, in fact, not to veer away from the direction, the precedent, the legal, traditions that have held fast and true for years and decades. One of the things that I know from being at TED for the last 10 years is that inspiration and transformation comes easiest, I've seen, from industries where they can imagine things differently, where they can actually find a solution that's really different. And many times it's not based on tradition. So the idea is, how do we unlock that for lawyers? So we're bringing together convenings. We're working right now with ACC Foundation to bring about training courses to make sure that lawyers can build with law firms and in-house counsel and among others to really think through these workshops together. And then we're on the path with them. So we're not teaching to people. We're going to be talking in groups and doing a workshop that will bring people together, community together, and hopefully will uncover some mysteries and really wonderful sparks along the way. So that's what that is.
That is fascinating. And congratulations again on the launch. I mean, the timing is impeccable. You are getting a creative solution to a really monumental challenge that has surfaced in recent years around training of lawyers and long-held assumptions around how lawyers really get trained and on what they get trained, whether that's from law schools or law firms. I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Thank you. And I'll tell you one thing, it's really interesting. When I speak in front of a seminar or I'm talking to people, I get the lawyer's perspective as an audience is really tough. When you go to a TED audience and you see the love and you see the amazing receptivity, it's quite something. Lawyers tend to be very I don't know if I agree. But when you play a TED Talk, and that's how we kind of shape the TED Law learning, it's always based on TED content. So there's going to be a TED Talk, there's going to be a TED video, there's going to be an excerpt from our TED Audio Collective, which is a podcast. It kind of takes lawyers out of themselves for a moment because they don't have to be in their role to listen or be inspired. And that's really the trick, right? So it's really more than just, hey, can we talk about it? It's having something as a catalyst to open them up. And then once they're open, then the dialogue can begin. So that's really the cool experiment that we're playing, and I'm very excited about it. And I'm, looking forward to seeing how this unfolds.
That is amazing. Well, let's jump into the questions. What's one issue facing legal teams right now that isn't getting enough attention?
I do think that we have to think more about just business pressure to kind of align in our legal work of how we're going to respond. I think the values and trust and respect that we hold gives us an opportunity to maybe take things to the next level. And what I mean by that is, are we advocating enough? So, for example, with respect to AI, that's one of the things that are happening around the world. And one of the things that we did at TED actually early on is advocate copyright ownership in some of the AI discussions and dialogues with the copyright authorities in different countries to actually promote, hey, this is what TED wants to do. This is what we're seeing. We'd love to protect, for example, speakers' voices and speakers' content, and we believe that privacy needs to be met. And let's advocate for that. And it was an interesting point because I hadn't seen enough attention in our legal peer groups of advocacy as much as I'm just going to give my client the answer. I'm just going to say what's risk averse and I'm going to advise them. Well, what if actually taking a stand? Are we able to? Well, I think we are. And of course, you have to be tactful and you have to be wise and you have to understand what your brand believes in, because you can't actually come away with something that's inconsistent. But I think it's a time that we need to really rethink where we are and push ahead a little bit in that area and see what we can do.
I love that. And especially when I think about all of your constituents at TED, all these creators who have, spent their lives on these innovative ideas and distilling them down into short talks or short videos. You don't want to wait until something goes wrong to say, hey, actually, we need to start advocating for this. So good for you. I think that's fantastic. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned as a GC?
As a general counsel, you get a lot of competing interests all the time. You hear the sales perspective, you hear the marketing perspective, you hear the financial issues and the risks, you hear what the executives want to do. And that is super challenging because you have to kind of be a little bit of a whirling dervish in your assessment of everything, and you have to take in everything. And I think what's really interesting is that none of those people standing alone is actually our client. Our client is the fictional entity that we represent. So part of the challenge and the lesson that I've learned is you can't just try to assuage or, adapt with whatever politics are talking at the moment or the pressures to kind of agree, because there's an internal pressure that you view as something that's really affecting people's direction. You have to be really confident that what you're representing is the best interests of the company. And that's one of the lessons that's really just been a big one for me.
I like that framing of it too, because a lot of the GCs that I talk to, rightfully so, are talking about the transition from being the advisor to the business or the lawyer to the business or to the executive team to thinking about me as a part of the executive team and as a part of the business and not siloed as the advisor. But I also like that framing of the fictional entity of the business, which in some ways depersonalizes the decisions, especially the hard decisions where you are sort of fighting that collaboration, teamwork, people-pleasing instinct when you're thinking about this fictional entity and how to serve that entity as best you can.
Exactly. And it's just, it takes time to get to a good point because you don't want to be alarmist and you don't want to be in a situation where you're being the contrarian, because then they won't bring you into the conversations enough. But you have to know how to build that in a way that, you've built the relationships already, you understand what's going on, and they know hopefully that your interest is where it will help them. And then they hear it, and then they take the decision. But I think that's an important way to kind of distinguish who we are as an executive and who we are as a GC and who we are as people. We just have to kind of keep all of those aligned somehow in our sense of balance.
What's one career moment that changed your trajectory?
Of my earliest ones years and years ago, I lived in the Netherlands and I worked on IP law for a brief time before I move back to New York. And I started my career in New York as a matrimonial attorney in Brooklyn. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff. And if you think about what that could mean, you're right. It's a lot of insanity. It was really, really an interesting profession to learn and cut my teeth in, because you're litigating and you're doing motion practice. And when you're doing motion practice, you only have about 3 minutes to make your case to the judge. And the judge likely has 300 cases they have to go through, don't have a lot of time. So all the preparation, all the analysis, all the law, the facts, all the cases, you can't bring up. You submit it in the brief, but then you have that moment. And what I found was, at the time, if judges were really busy, not interested, they could vote or decide against your interests, but not because you had bad law or bad facts, for other reasons. And it really struck me as this difficult process to be in, to know that, oh, my client's kids may not be going back home with them because of this, or the worry that they had about getting a protective order is not going to be followed because of this, right? So I wanted to leave the profession and go back into IP. And one of the things that I was constantly advised against was, once you're here, you're here. Everybody here has had a career for this many years. Once you're stuck, don't think about leaving. And it was really interesting, because I was only there for like 2.5 years at the time. But I think work cultures sometimes make you believe in things that are not necessarily true. And I think what's really important is to listen to your internal voice. I realized that we are only our best advocates, and we have to lean into what we're thinking. Our intuition kicks in. You have one life to live, so you might as well do what you're meant to do. Listen to yourself and listen to your own voice was really the moment things changed.
That's a beautiful reflection and great advice for anyone who's thinking about career change or stepping off the traditional path, or not just doing what they quote unquote are supposed to do. How have you leveraged flexible legal talent as a way to augment your in-house team?
So one way that's really helped us at TED, particularly because we're a nonprofit and we don't have deep pockets and we don't have a tremendous amount of resources, is partnering with law schools. We've partnered with Fordham Law School and Columbia Law School to build this really vibrant internship program at TED. And one of the reasons I really love it is because it's actually a two-way benefit. It's a benefit for us to get discrete projects being helped by people who are so curious, so open. And of course, they love kind of working within the TED environment to learn what it's like to be in-house. But we can put them on specific projects, and they're very smart. And then something a little bit unique that TED does, which I doubt other companies would do, but they certainly could, is at the very end, we have them do this TED-style presentation on the TED stage in our headquarters, where they present what they worked on during the entire semester, and they tie a personal narrative to the story. So that's something that we've loved to do.
Yeah, that's very cool. And a few things jump out at me from what you said. One is giving this experience and this exposure to law students is part of the training that we talked about earlier, a new way of training by getting law students or recent law grads right into the business instead of having to go through sort of the typical track of law firm training. This is a great entry point for them. And then another piece of the training you mentioned is that communication. How do you communicate to the business in a way that they're going to understand and receive, which is really new for law students and so important for anyone in-house. And then I also loved the tie-in to the work that TED does. So the attorneys there can really understand, or the law students can really understand, who are the people that we're serving and what is it like to be in their shoes. That's really neat.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to see the in-house perspective, because law firm culture is so different from in-house. You really have to get to know the client really in a way that becomes your kind of main project all the time, 24/7. And you can't just say to people in a business, here you go, here's my advice.
Yeah.
Decide. It's not like that. It's
No.
like, what should I do? Okay.
No.
Let's discuss. And it's much more you're part of your main character.
Yeah.
So that's an important distinction.
That's fantastic. If you weren't an attorney, Nishat, what would you be?
So I have to harken back to the days I was in the bathroom accepting an Oscar for my acting skills. I think a lot of people have probably done this, but I did play Dracula in the lead in high school when I was in 10th grade. That was kind of, epic for me, but that definitely would have been my first love. And I actually pursued it, but a director who had worked at the high school at the time, and this was decades ago, had said that a woman of color, he didn't describe it that way. He just said I wasn't blonde, which was his way of saying it. And my background would be very, very, very hard in a very, very, very narrow field to be able to get work. So I pivoted, and it was only when I went to college that I ended up finding the law. Thank God.
And I've seen you on stage, and you are a natural. So, maybe that it will be your next career, your next
There
life.
you go. There you go. Exactly.
And the bonus question, Paragon turns 20 this year. What's one memory from 20 years ago that still stands out to you?
I would say it was at one of those other moments. I think I talked about my moving from matrimonial law back to IP, but I also had a moment where I was looking for work because I was stuck in a company where the culture was really counterproductive, and it was not New York, shall I say, and very slow and very different and completely different industry than I was used to. And I was looking and looking and looking and looking for places, and I kept on going about it by sending resumes to openings. And there was a moment where I said to myself, what do I need to do to change this outcome? And I thought of my father. My father had passed away probably 6 years prior. And he was very kind, and he would often be like, Nish, I'm not your father today, I'm your friend. Those kinds of conversations. Really, really sweet, very, very well read, really helpful. And I heard his advice in a spiritual moment. And his advice was simply, what are 5 things you want in a role? And it kind of switched my complete view, because I was looking for openings, but I wasn't really focused on what I wanted. I was just throwing myself over. As soon as I saw an opening, I'm like, that's what I want. I want to work in retail. Oh my God, I've always wanted to tell. Like, no, I hadn't thought about it. And so all of a sudden I put kind of my thoughts together, and I realized that I wanted to have, a thriving culture. I wanted growth. I wanted to have fair compensation, a place that aligned and allowed me to also not leave my kids in hanging, because my kids were in middle school at the time, and it's really tough. And wouldn't you know it, literally, I swear to God, the day after, I got a call from an opening that fit exactly those 5 things. And I was so blown away. And everyone has their direction, whatever it may be. But how do you listen to it, and how do you make that voice come out a little bit more? So that was the moment 20 years ago where I was like, wow, this works. Oh my God.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is beautiful. And what a wonderful way to wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, your stories, your wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you. It's been really nice. Thank you.
All right, that's a wrap on today's episode of GC Sidebar. Catch more great conversations on our website at paragonlegal.com. Thanks for tuning in.